The program bass versus real bass discussion isn't going away anytime soon, but in this clip, Kellen shows you how to get the best of both worlds by combining the two together. He explains how attention to detail and tuning the real bass are key to managing phase problems and creating a huge bass sound. Check it out.
Bass. Oh my gosh. So we tracked live bass for this. So first, just to put a disclaimer out there, our bass player is ripping, and he's so ripping that he plays so hard that every time I have to melodyne his bass, I'm always just pulling it down. It's all sharp. And so, I mean, even in general, he'll tune like slightly flat because he knows he plays hard, and that's just the way he does it. I mean, you can't like, it's a good thing because it sounds awesome, but at the same time, it's kind of a tuning nightmare. So we just, in general, will tune him a little bit flat, and that usually solves the problem for the most part. But pretty much anytime I do live bass, I always melodyne it, regardless of the project. Or if it's just like a little out, you can slap like a little bit of auto tune on there, and that's fine. But when you have like really riffy stuff, it's just better to melodyne it. I wanted the live bass, but I also wanted like a really consistent sub, and I also wanted like a really consistent kind of like mid-range. I went through like 3 variations of bass for this record, and there was only one that was like really getting what I wanted out of it, and that was just to do like his real bass on the top, the sub bass that's like a virtual instrument, and then I used nuclear bass for like all the mid-rangey kind of stuff, and then there's just like a high distortion scratch print. So I'll play you like everybody's heard it, but I'll play the real bass by itself. So it's pretty like robotic, but still sounds real. And I think that's what a lot of people forget. I've found like, I think people sometimes are too afraid to do stuff like when, especially tracking bass or tracking guitar, like riffy stuff, to do it too robotically because they're afraid that's going to like lose some of the human aspect to it. But if you already have live overheads and you have other live elements and you have vocals that aren't always like perfectly on the grid, I always recommend just doing the bass like as robotic as possible because you need that locked in with the kick. And honestly, like people aren't going to complain or hear it, it's just going to sound good. So that was kind of like our goal for this when tracking bass, is just to make sure that every 16th note was able to be heard. Everything was super consistent. I'm fairly certain we tracked it through my Avalon little DI box, and we used a Kiesel, I think it was a Kiesel multiscale that sounds awesome. It's kind of ding-wall-ish, but it just still didn't quite do it for me. But what I ended up doing is just kind of reducing it to just the top end's scrapiness. So I'll go by one on those. So we're not doing anything with Saturn on the bottom end. It's mostly just this mid-range, like kind of mid to high, and then some of this high stuff that actually I was pulling down. It's mostly this stuff. And then a little bit of top scratchy stuff. Well, actually, I think I'm just killing that. Yeah, I guess I'm just killing that. So really just adding some drive on the British Rock amp down here in the amp section. Yeah, it's British Rock amp. Which already sounds pretty good, but then I'm just slicing with the EQ, just a stock EQ, slicing all this low stuff out that we don't need, just notching out some kind of funky frequencies. I just wanted to get rid of that. Doing this guy. Just pulling that out. It's all that pick scrape right there. We're just pulling that out as well. And then any of the high sizzle, I didn't need any of that. And then we're just limiting it pretty hard, I think. Yeah. Pretty decent amount. Just trying to make sure this line doesn't move. The basic idea. And then again, because sometimes when you squash stuff, it's just going to bring out even more stuff that wasn't there before. So we're just pulling this out. Pulling, cutting around 300, pulling a little bit of this stuff out. Just frequency ringy stuff that we don't need. And honestly, it probably wouldn't be that different without it. Yeah. Just gets rid of some of that ring, we just don't need those notes. Really what I need it for is like the scratchy, percussive nature of it with some distortion. That's really what I wanted out of that real bass. And then I took the real, I'm pretty sure this real bass might be nuclear. Let me see. Yeah, so I just made, I'll show you guys how I did that. So that was just the DI, and I ran the DI into Saturn, just cranking heavy saturation from everything from 160 hertz and up. And then I just filtered the crap out of it, like way up there, like 1K to 7.5. Just filtered the crap out of it because I still wanted like a little bit more dirtiness, and then just limited it. Pretty much almost identical settings to that, and then it sounded like what you hear. So it's just like I wanted just like a little extra dirt. So them together. To me, that's easier than using like a pedal. I have some pedals that I could have ran it through, or I could have ran it through the Kemper. But I liked that better just to do it in the box and just with plugins, because then I have way more.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, well, yeah, it sounds cool. More control over it. So this is not the real bass. And I'm sorry if this is the first time he's hearing about that. Sorry, Corn. We used dark glass, and you're more than welcome to copy my settings. It's nothing crazy. I was just pulling, with the nuclear bass, like, it's a really great sounding MIDI bass, and I'll play that dry by itself so you get the idea. I love this bass. I use it on everything. No disrespect to any others. That's just one I've gotten like used to, and like once you get used to one thing, you just kind of stick with it. That's just like the plain nuclear bass DI default when you load that up. And then I ran it into, like I said, just this dark glass. And so it just had a little bit of drive. And I think the only thing I changed, no, I don't think I did. I don't believe I changed any of these. This might have been off originally, and I think I might have turned that on. But not doing any crazy settings. I do have the distortion on. The blend isn't quite 100% on this one, and drive was pretty mid. I didn't want to I already got drive coming from somewhere else. So this sound that you're hearing printed, this is the dark glass. I printed it. Because otherwise, running it right now, it makes my session mad.
Question from Joe Vitor is, if the goal is being super robotic, why not just go with program bass? What does the real one bring to the table?
So I just wanted any of the spots where you hear kind of the scrapiness of the bass that pops out. I wanted it to be like his authentic bass.
Mm-hmm. You can't recreate that.
No, you can't. So we just did a little bit of our bass around 110. That's all this stuff. Oh, sorry, I'll turn this off. My bad. Just adds a little bit. In retrospect, adding that 110 probably was not the greatest idea, but I went back and tried to, with this slope, trying to maybe edge a little bit of that off. But I just wanted some low warmth. And then got this EQ. So I was pulling out 75 and putting 75 in at the same time. But this one's more steep and this one's more wide. So I just wanted to all the stuff around 75. I think that I was probably notching that because of the kick. And then cutting some 200. Didn't need any of that. Cutting some 360. And some of that pick scrape, I didn't really need that. And then I don't know what I was thinking with this, to be honest. It's out of my mind. It's a little bit of control. Yeah, just pulling a lot of that down. Pulling some, what is this, 120 to 300. Just kind of controlling that. Controlling this where most of the notes are going to be. It's a minute difference, but it's there. Yeah, it's not crazy shaping or anything. For some reason, I put stereo plugins on here, which is not tight. And then we did some NV2 to just slam it. Obviously, there's a volume boost. I really love this plugin. So sometimes I've found on bass, the nice thing is you can squish it from both sides, but I've also found that you have to be careful with this low level compression, because if you have a lot of depending on if it's a MIDI bass, what kind of string ring there is, it can sometimes pull that up and you don't want that. Or if you have a lot of low mid flubbiness, like weird stuff in there, it can pull that up as well at the same time while evening out the notes. So it's just, you gotta be a little tricky with it, but it definitely smooths it out. I mean, you can even kind of hear it in that on the boom, you can hear it doing it a little bit on there. Sometimes it's a little unavoidable. And then the last thing in this chain is just getting rid of anything below 83, anything above 850. I just wanted to get rid of that 187. I just didn't really need any of that. Didn't need any of that 187 or that 250. So even though it seems kind of counterintuitive to like go and control this low sub stuff only to cut it, I wanted to control it as it was going into MV2 so then I could cut it. So it's not like crazy out of control. Because even when you know, like we talked about, when you start compressing stuff, you'll just get like a bunch of extra junk that used to be like, you know, negative 20 dBs, but then you compress it. Now all of a sudden it's at negative 10. And so you still got to just like cut even more. So final product. So before and after. I just wanted like a warm kind of like notey part. You know what I mean? And then we have this slap sub. So this is an Omnisphere. This guy called TR Slap in a Sub. What else could you want?
Nothing.
Nothing. I don't know how I stumbled across this, to be 100% honest. At some point before we did this record, I started using it and I just found that it had a really consistent kind of sub bass to it. So I just took the same MIDI and printed it and then filtered a bunch of junk out that I obviously didn't need. So just all that low. And then slapped R bass on it, set to 62. Because I wanted just like a little bit more, you know, without it. It's pretty subtle. It's not doing too much to it. And then I think I just, yeah, that was probably like a late stage mixing thing, was like, oh, I just want a little bit more sub. And instead of, I probably had already done automation on it. Yeah. So instead of going and doing automation on the whole thing, I just figured, well, I'll just put a gain plugin on there and boost it up a little bit. And then all 4 of those tracks, put these back on, run here to my bass stack. Because again, this is just a folder. So this folder routes, it's like a self-routing folder without these plugins. So just kind of controlling some of that upper note part. You can hear it poke out a little bit. Kind of subdues that a little bit. Because it's such a riffy song, I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't popping out all the wow. And then good old Pro Q again. Pretty different. All this like mid-range ring, I just wanted to get rid of that. It's all that stuff. I just didn't really need it. I wanted it to be more scooped. Let's see. I just found there was maybe like a little bit too much 160 in there. Probably been fine without it, but really with this bass for our band, I probably would not do this the same way for every band. I mean, I definitely wouldn't, but it's like I wanted some of the note in here between like 100 and 120, but I also wanted some of that sub, like that 60 to 40. I wanted like, for some reason, I really, really wanted that, even though having a lot of sub with songs that have a lot of riffing stuff can be kind of a nightmare. And I put a pretty steep cut here at the end, and that's probably doing a little bit to boost that low sub stuff. Yeah, it seems like it kind of tightens it up a little bit. Like I was saying earlier, I don't know if it's just like a mind trickery thing, but it definitely sounds like when you do a steeper one, you get a little bit more of whatever's next to it, even if it's subtle. There's a tiny bit there. And then we just leveled it out a little bit with L1, just hitting the tiny little peaks. See, it's like barely doing anything. It's already pretty controlled at that point. And then I monoed it. I was like, I'm afraid it's stereo. Let's make it mono. And then the last thing in the chain, track spacer that's triggering off of my kick ducker, which I'll show you here in a second. And it's just dipping out a little bit. It's low end. You know, it's only at 17%. It's not like... Just ducking a little bit. I don't know if that, yeah, it's probably fastest attack, fastest release, yeah. And then just because I was super paranoid, I'd put it on mid-side and put it only to the middle, even though I'd made it mono. So I will show you this real quick because this is super important with the bass. I do this in every project. So once the drums are finalized, I will take the kick. Usually it's my line kick, and I'll solo that and then print that or just bounce it in place, put it up here on a track, send it to nothing. And then that is what is triggering my track spacer on my bass. But I'll show you what it sounds like. So it's literally just a print of that kick sample. But I just send it to nothing down here, and now it's triggering. So like without it, oh, not that, come on. And I don't know if it's how it is in other DAWs, but in Logic, you don't even have to have like the volume up or anything. You can just send it to nothing, and then it just triggers off that audio clip. And that just definitely makes a little bit of room for it. So like without it. It works pretty good together.